My daughter was unconscious on the garage floor when I found her, and my father-in-law was standing 3 feet away with a stopwatch in his hand. He wasn't calling for help. He wasn't on his knees beside her. He was standing there, looking down at her small body with an expression I still cannot find the right word for. Somewhere between disappointment and surprise, the look a coach makes when a player goes down on the field and he's trying to decide if it's serious or if they'll walk it off. Piper was 7 years old. She weighed 48 pounds. She had a heart condition we had spent 2 years learning to live around carefully. And in the 40 minutes I had left them alone together, something had happened that was already sending an ambulance to my in-laws' house. I used to think love and harm were opposites. That July changed everything I understood about both words. If you're here with me right now, drop a hi in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I'll read everyone, and if any part of what I'm about to tell you sounds like something you've lived, a moment when the danger was wearing a familiar face, please subscribe. You're not alone in this fight. It started the way summer disasters usually do, beautifully. It was a Saturday in early July at my in-laws' house in Gresham, Oregon, just east of Portland. My father-in-law, Glenn, was the kind of man who turned a backyard cookout into a production. Paper lanterns along the fence, a kiddie sprinkler in the corner of the lawn, 3 kinds of potato salad on a table draped with a gingham cloth. He'd been up before sunrise setting it up, and when we arrived at 11, he was already at the grill in an apron that said "Coaching is my cardio," turning ribs with the focused intensity of a man who did not understand halfway. My wife, Thea, had grown up in that backyard. She told me once it was the place she still felt most like herself, before her older brother died, before the family rearranged itself around that absence. I always noticed how she softened when we turned into the driveway, how her shoulders came down from wherever she carried them the rest of the week. Glenn was 63 and carried himself like a man with something still left to prove. He had spent 40 years coaching high school football in the Portland metro area. 3 state championships, a gymnasium named after his program, former players who still called him coach well into their 30s. Retirement hadn't taken the urgency out of him. He still ran every morning. He still read sports physiology the way other men his age read novels. He still watched every room he entered for who was applying themselves and who wasn't. He was funny when he wanted to be, generous to a fault, and completely convinced that he understood the human body better than most medical professionals did. He adored Piper. That was never complicated. She was his only grandchild, and from the moment she arrived, Glenn had talked about her with the same focused attention he'd applied to every athlete he'd ever coached, not in a cold way, in a devoted one. He kept a framed photo of her on his workbench in the garage, right next to a smaller, older photo of a boy in a football uniform. Thea's brother, Caden. He'd died at 16. Thea almost never said his name, and Glenn never said it at all, but the photo was always there, and I had long since learned to leave it alone. Piper's heart condition had shown up during a routine checkup when she was 5. The pediatric cardiologist, Dr. Keene, was clear and careful with us. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, HCM, manageable, not a death sentence. But there were hard limits that could not be treated as negotiable. No high-intensity cardiovascular exercise, no competitive contact sports, no pushing through chest pain or pressure or shortness of breath under any circumstance. If she reported any of those things during any physical activity, everything stopped immediately and she was evaluated. Dr. Keene printed the protocol and handed us 2 copies, and told us to share them with anyone responsible for Piper's care. Thea gave a copy to her parents herself. She sat with Glenn and Ruth at their kitchen table and went through it carefully, point by point. I was sitting right there. Glenn listened, asked a few measured questions, and then nodded the way people nod when they have already made up their mind, but don't want to have the argument yet. Over the next 2 years, his skepticism expressed itself in small, deniable ways. He'd encourage Piper to race him across the yard and then catch himself when Thea gave him a look. He'd say things like, "Kids are tougher than doctors give them credit for," when we explained why Piper couldn't join a weekend soccer clinic. He sent Thea an article once from a wellness website about how overprotective parenting weakened children's immune response. Thea had a long phone call with him. He apologized. Things appeared to settle. Then Piper mentioned, during a drive home from one of their visits, that Grandpa had made her run in the backyard, while Thea and I had been inside helping Ruth with something in the kitchen. Glenn said it was just a game. He apologized again. He seemed chastened. Thea chose to believe him. The way adult children sometimes choose to believe their parents, with a faith built on years of being protected by someone that is harder to revoke than it should be. That Saturday in July, while Thea and Ruth were in the kitchen finishing the dessert table, Glenn came out to the picnic table where Piper and I were sitting examining a beetle she'd found on a leaf. He said he wanted to show Piper something in the garage, his old VHS tapes from championship seasons, the trophies and plaques, the things he'd saved. Piper's face lit up. She loved his stories about those years. I looked toward the house. I thought about going to get Thea. I thought about saying, "Let's wait just a few minutes, let her come too." Glenn caught my hesitation and said, easily, without pressure, or so it seemed, "Just a few minutes. She'll love it." He had a way of making caution feel like the unkind thing, like you were the one making it difficult. I said, "Okay." I watched them walk to the garage together, Piper's hand in his. That is the decision I returned to most. 42 minutes later, Thea came out from the house looking for Piper, and the expression on her face when she found me still sitting at the picnic table told me she already felt the wrongness before she understood it. We walked to the garage together. She pushed open the side door first. Piper was on the floor. She was breathing but barely present, eyes half open, lips pale, her small chest pulling air in shallow, uneven movements. Glenn was standing a few feet away with the orange lanyard of his stopwatch still looped around his wrist. He was not touching her. He was not on the phone. He was watching her the way you watch a body for signs of recovery, not the way you watch someone you love. Thea's voice broke open into something that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a word. She was on the floor beside Piper before I crossed the garage. I was already on the phone with 911, giving the address in the flat, automatic voice that arrives when your brain decides the only thing that matters is the next correct action. Glenn said, "She just got a little winded. She's going to be fine." I did not look at him. The ambulance arrived in under 7 minutes. The team at OHSU ran every test quickly and told us, in the careful language that doctors use when they are managing their own alarm, that Piper had experienced a ventricular arrhythmia. Her heart had lost its normal rhythm, triggered by sustained high-intensity physical exertion. The episode had lasted long enough to cause her to lose consciousness. She was stable. No permanent damage appeared to have occurred. But the attending physician looked at us directly and said that 10 more minutes of delay, or a longer episode, would have produced a different conversation. Thea gripped my forearm so hard I felt it the next morning. I nodded. I could not find words. Glenn and Ruth were in the waiting area when I came out. Ruth was crying quietly into a tissue. Glenn was sitting with his hands clasped between his knees, back straight, the posture of someone waiting out something they disagree with. When I sat down across from him, the first thing he said was, "You don't need to make this into something. Kids get overheated. She's stable." I looked at the wall and said nothing. An hour later, Glenn left his phone on the waiting room chair when he went to the restroom. His jacket was draped over it, but one corner of the screen was visible, and it lit up with a notification from an app called StrideLog. The preview text read, "Session 14, P duration 42 min, peak HR 191. Session 14. He hadn't locked the phone. I opened the app. There were 13 prior entries, each dated, each labeled P. The notes were methodical and detailed, written in the shorthand of someone who had been keeping this kind of record for decades. The oldest entry was from October, 9 months earlier. Session 1, 8 min introductory movement, some resistance at first, improved by end. Session 3, 18 min continuous, mild complaint of tiredness around minute 12 normal adjustment phase. Session 6, 27 min timed circuit, heart rate elevated appropriately, building baseline. Session 9, chest complaint at minute 14, told her it was normal exertion feeling. She pushed through, strong finish. Session 11, real endurance developing. Skeptics would not recognize her. Session 13, full sprint interval work, some hesitation, overcame it. Excellent. Session 9, chest complaint at minute 14, told her it was normal. She pushed through. My daughter had told him her chest hurt, and he had logged it as a data point and continued. I photographed every entry on my own phone, all 14. Then I set his phone back exactly where I found it, sat down in the waiting room chair, and pressed my hands flat against my thighs, and waited for my breathing to even out, knowing it wouldn't. 9 months, 13 sessions before today. Every visit to this house, every time Glenn had taken Piper somewhere to see his trophies or help with something in the garage, it had been a training program, documented, deliberate, conducted without our knowledge, in direct violation of everything we had told him, everything we had given him in writing, everything Piper's cardiologist had explained. When Glenn returned from the restroom, I waited until Ruth stepped away to find coffee. Then I said very quietly, "Stride log, 14 sessions." He went still in a way that told me he understood immediately what I had found. "Session 9, I said. "She told you her chest hurt, you noted it and kept going." He looked at me for a long moment. Then I was teaching her that discomfort isn't the same as danger. She has a diagnosed heart condition. She has a label, he said, and the gentleness in how he said it was worse than anger would have been. "I've watched her move. She's stronger than that paperwork says. The body adapts when you give it the chance. You just have to let it." I stood up and walked out of the hospital. I stood in the July rain outside the entrance and called Detective Castillo at the Portland Police Bureau's Family Crimes Unit, then Dr. Keene's after-hours line. I stood there for a long time with my phone in both hands while the rain came down and the parking structure lights reflected in long orange streaks across the wet pavement. Telling Thea was the hardest thing I did that night. She read the screenshots of the app logs standing at Piper's hospital window, while Piper slept in the bed behind her. She went through each entry slowly, the way you read something when part of you is hoping you've misunderstood. When she got to session 9, she stopped. She stared at the screen, set the phone down on the windowsill, looked out at the parking structure for a long time without speaking. "He logged everything," she said, finally. "Every session, 9 months. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "He did the same thing with Caden. I found training journals in a box in the garage after the funeral. Times, distances, how Caden performed. I never told anyone." She pressed her hand over her mouth. "Caden's condition was undiagnosed. They found it in the autopsy. My dad has believed since then. I've known this without him ever saying it. He's believed that if Caden had been stronger, more conditioned, he would have survived." She turned to look at me. He wasn't trying to hurt Piper. He was trying to fix the thing he believes took Caden. That is the thought that has stayed with me the longest. The certainty that you are saving someone. The way it swallows every warning, every boundary, every small child telling you her chest hurts. Because a person who has decided they are rescuing someone has already decided their own knowledge matters more than anyone else's. Detective Castillo came to the hospital that evening. He was calm and thorough, treated the information seriously without theater, and told us that a CPS referral and a criminal investigation would both be opened. Glenn was contacted for questioning. He cooperated without a lawyer, which surprised me. I think he still believed that if someone just listened to his reasoning, they'd understand. He came to the hospital the following morning before we could prevent it. He sat across from me in the family lounge, with the posture of a man who had something to explain, not something to answer for. "You have to understand something about Caden," he said. I waited. He was 16 that last year. I had backed off him. Let his mother tell me he needed rest, less pressure. I was gentler than I'd ever been. His voice was steady and quiet. 6 months later, he was gone, undiagnosed condition. And I have thought every single day since then about whether, if his heart had been trained, if we had built his endurance instead of accommodating what we thought were limitations, he would still be here. He looked at me without flinching. "I was not going to make the same mistake with Piper." "She told you her chest hurt," I said. "You wrote it down and kept going." "I made a judgment call." "Based on what?" "Based on 18 years of watching what happens when you stop." Thea was in the doorway. I didn't know how long she'd been there. "Dad," she said. He turned. "Caden didn't die because you went easy on him." Her voice was measured in the way that cost something real. "He had a structural defect in his heart. No training program changes that. You know that. You've known it for years." She took once into the room. "We gave you Piper's files. We gave you the protocol. We showed you the same tests, the same cardiac structure. You chose to believe that your 18-year-old conclusion was worth more than her documented diagnosis." Her voice dropped. "You put her in your garage, and you recorded her heart rate at 191, and you wrote, 'It's excellent' in your notes." Glenn said nothing. His jaw worked. "Don't come here and tell me you were saving her," Thea said. "You almost killed her, and you almost did it the exact same way she lost her brother." She walked back to Piper's room. Glenn left. He did not try to argue again. The restraining order was granted within the week. CPS opened a formal case. Dr. Keene filed a detailed medical declaration. The psychological evaluation Glenn was ordered to complete took 8 weeks. The summary described a fixed belief system built on unprocessed grief, 18 years of reinterpreting Caden's death through the framework of physical inadequacy, resulting in a rigid, closed conviction that exposure therapy and physical conditioning could override a genetic cardiac condition. The evaluator was precise. Glenn had not been acting with malice in the clinical definition. He had been acting from belief, which made him more dangerous, not less, because people who believe they are rescuing someone do not respond to ordinary warnings. They reinterpret warnings as obstacles placed by people who don't understand. 3 years supervised probation, mandatory individual therapy, mandatory medical literacy course, no unsupervised contact with Piper, pending 2-year review with the option for permanent restriction. Ruth did not defend him. She sat at our kitchen table one afternoon and told Thea quietly and directly that she had not known about the training sessions, that she believed us, that she was sorry. Thea cried. Ruth stayed until after dark. What those two have now is not what they had before, and it isn't something broken. It's something still being rebuilt, carefully, with no guarantee of where it ends up. 8 months after it happened, Thea found a sealed envelope tucked inside a gym bag. Glenn had given Piper the previous Christmas while she was sorting through a storage box. His handwriting on the front. For Piper, when you're old enough to understand. We held it for a week. Then we opened it together on the back porch after Piper was asleep. He had written 3 pages, in the same deliberate hand he used for everything. He wrote that he knew Piper would be angry when she read it, that she had every right to be. He wrote about Caden, the first time he had committed Caden's name to paper in anything any of us had ever seen. He wrote, I watched your uncle disappear and I spent 18 years deciding I knew why. I was wrong. I was so certain. I was right that I stopped being able to hear any voice that said otherwise, including yours. That kind of certainty is not strength. I know that now. I hope you grow up knowing the difference. Thea folded the letter and held it in her lap. I'm not ready to forgive him, she said. You don't have to be. But I understand him, and I'm not sure those two things have to happen together, or if they should. Piper is 8 now. She has thick pink frames she picked out herself, and a serious ongoing research project about sea turtles, and a habit of narrating anything she finds outside, like she's hosting a nature documentary for an audience of 1. Her most recent cardiologist visit was unremarkable, which is exactly what you want in a cardiac report. She knows her heart works differently. She talks about it matter-of-factly, without embarrassment, the way kids talk about glasses or inhalers, as a feature of her life, not a flaw in it. She asked me during bedtime a few weeks ago whether her heart was broken. I told her no, that different wasn't the same as broken, that her heart was actually very precise, and that it needed to be understood instead of pushed. She thought about it. Like a special setting, she said. Exactly like that. She seemed satisfied and went back to her book. Thea and I started couples therapy a few months after the sentencing. Not because something broke between us, but because we didn't want to pretend we'd come through something that large without carrying any of it. In one session, I talked about the moment I said, okay, how I'd felt something go quiet and cold in my stomach. When Glenn said just a few minutes, and I had overridden it because I didn't want to seem difficult. Because somewhere along the way, I had been taught to call that kind of unease anxiety rather than instinct. The therapist asked what I would tell someone else in that moment. Trust the thing you already know, I said. When something in your gut goes quiet and cold around your child, that is not paranoia. That is information. The people who need you to override it have something to gain from your silence. Ruth visits on Sundays now. She and Piper are building something new, carefully, on ground that has been cleared of everything it used to hold. I watch them from the kitchen window sometimes. Piper showing Ruth whatever she's found that week, a striped rock, a feather, a caterpillar in a mason jar. Ruth leaning in over each one like it deserves the full weight of her attention. Maybe that's the most any of us can offer after something like this. Presence. The willingness to lean in. There's a photo on the refrigerator from a few weeks ago. Piper in the backyard of our new place outside Bend, squinting into the afternoon sun, holding a jar with both hands. She looks like someone who expects the world to be interesting. That is exactly who I wanted her to grow up to be. I used to think justice was a verdict, a sentence handed down, a chapter that closes. I understand it differently now. Justice is the morning after the verdict when your daughter asks you a question about sea turtles at breakfast and you answer her, and the answer is just the answer, no dread underneath it, no fear of the phone ringing. It is quiet. It is ordinary. It is the most important thing in the world. Some of the most dangerous people in our children's lives are the ones who love them. Not because love is dangerous, but because love that has calcified into certainty stops listening, stops adjusting, decides it already knows the answer and keeps going even when a small voice says stop. I don't hate my father-in-law. I don't think that surprises me anymore. What I feel when I think about him is something closer to grief. For Caden, who never got a diagnosis, and for Glenn, who built his entire understanding of strength on the wrong lesson from losing him, and for my daughter, who paid the price of that education on a July afternoon while I was sitting at a picnic table watching a beetle. What I know is this: the next time something in my gut goes cold when someone makes a request involving Piper, I will listen to it. I will not call it overthinking. I will not smooth it over to make the moment easier for someone else. We owe our children that. That and the willingness to stay in the fight, even when the fight is with someone we love. That is what we survived, and that is what we're carrying forward.